Okay, so doing this video because someone had a question on our Discord channel, um, which is a good question. And they're a longtime subscriber. Yeah, I'm not going to mention their name. I don't think they care, but I typically don't mention names unless someone really insists, please mention my name. But they had a great question, and it's a really cool one. And so they said, ask HershNoeie. Oh, by the way, make sure that you do get onto our Discord. I keep saying that because it actually is pretty fun. Because I'm able to interact. It's like people then are no longer kind of subscribers. It's kind of like they're friends. Is that weird? Like I've never met some of these people, but because we talk so often, like I know a lot about them, and it's kind of like they're friends. I mean, I don't know how to explain it. It's just kind of it's different. But go onto our Discord. I'm able to chat with you, talk to you. Sometimes we actually do trivia. So there's a thing I can program in there, and so it just comes up with all these random trivia questions. And so far, no one has beat me yet. So you're looking at the king of trivia, which is shocking. Now I say that, but the person that asked me this question wasn't playing trivia at that time, and he's pretty smart, so he might beat me. But anyway, so his question is first time home buyer tips. I want to maybe buy a home in the next 2 years in the Cary Riley area. He's in North Carolina. Around $200,000 maybe. My salary is $50,000 a year. How much cold hard cash do I need to have saved up before I bother an agent? Unexpected costs, things people don't typically think about. Now that's a really great series of questions. One thing that I will say that's great about buying a first time home, and I took advantage of that, which really and truly, Noel should have taken advantage of this too, but I didn't think about it. But what I took advantage of was when I first got my home, the federal government was offering, and I think it started at that year too. I was lucky. Yeah, in 2008, the Housing and Recovery Economic Recovery Act. I bought my house in 2008 or 2009. Realtor told me about this. You get your first time home buyer's tax credit. And I said, say what? First time home buyer's tax credit. And what it is basically if you've never bought a home before, the government will give you a tax credit on it. Now, at the time, it was $7,500. They've since increased it the year after that to $8,000. So they give you $8,000 in tax credits for a home. Now the idea is that people, if they offer you some sort of a tax credit, people are more likely to pretty much buy it, right? That people are more out there to actually get a home, and it really prompts home buying, right? The big thing is that buying a home is very important locally, not only to individual wealth, of course, but city governments want you to buy homes because you're going to be paying property tax. If you're paying property tax, that benefits the city, and that's a good thing. The federal government also gets a little bit. So when you buy a home, it is important to everybody as far as government is concerned. As far as you, it's good because you're planting your roots in that area, in that city, and it's kind of like a firm commitment. And every time there's a person that arrives to a city, the federal government gives states that extra money, and state governments give those cities with bigger populations more money because you have more people, you need more services. It's a long, drawn out thing other than what this person's asking me, but that's basically the reason why, right? So there's all these different reasons why it's important for the government to say please buy a home, right? So aside from the fact that you would get a first time home buyer's tax credit, which it's good that they're still doing that, but buying your home increases your wealth. It just does, right? Let me dismiss this before it. Okay. So that would be one of my first tips. The second thing I would do The first thing I should say is make sure that you pay off everything. If you have any sort of outstanding credit card bills or any outstanding debts or anything like that, pay it off. Now, some people may have a car and they're like, I can't pay that off, but make sure it's in good standing. Credit should be in good standing for a pretty good, decent amount of time. I forget now what it is because I mean, it's been a while, but I think 6 months. I can't remember where they want you to have good, solid, on-time payment history. Obviously, if you've never been delinquent and you have a pretty high credit score, different set of circumstances, right? You pretty much can go in there, not a problem, right? Not an issue. But if you've had some troubled history in terms of your credit, then you probably want to get a financial planner or someone at the bank and kind of have them take a look at your credit report and make sure that's good to go. Another thing that you want to do too, before even doing that, is getting your credit report. When I worked for a government agency, one of the big things that we looked at was the Fair Credit Reporting Act, and it made sure that Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion basically did what they were supposed to do in terms of your credit history and that they weren't going above and beyond what they're supposed to do. Also, it made sure that debt collectors were reporting correctly, right? So that the information they're posting is accurate and not fraudulent. But you want to make sure you get your credit report because all three of those different agencies or companies are going to be different, right? So their scoring method and their formula is going to be different. And if I am the Bank of Herschel and I decide you coming to me to get a home loan, I may only use Equifax. I may not use Experian or TransUnion, and maybe your Equifax score is your lowest. But it doesn't matter because that's the one that I use. Or it could be that they may use a blending of all three. They may take the average of all three, right? So the best thing to do is get your credit report from all three, look through them very carefully, make sure there's nothing that's outstanding. If there's any sort of debt bills that are legitimate, make sure that you pay those off because anytime that you're trying to go and get credit, anything that's hanging out there is a problem, especially if you're on the cusp. If you're on the cusp and a loan officer has to decide if they're going to give you a loan or not, they're going to look at that and say, well, what about these bills back here? Or this isn't current right now, so maybe you should pay that. So that's always going to be there. That's a problem. So if you're buying right at where you are, I don't know. But if you're buying right at where you're able to get approved, then it could present a problem. So make sure everything in your credit report is accurate, up to date, and correct. That should be the first thing that you do. Okay, so credit report, get that, make sure everything's good and clear. Make sure you pay off any sort of debts and bills and outstanding things that you do have that's out there. And you also want to go to the bank after you've done all those things I mentioned and see what you're able to get. So you get your approval letter. How much money? They're going to take a look at your income. They're going to look at your debt to income ratio. They have a formula that they put in there. They're going to check and see if you can afford it based on everything else. So if you have a lot of liabilities like cars and stuff like that, that could pose a problem, right? Also, if you have a whole lot of things that aren't a liability, let's say you have two houses, which is in our case, we own two homes. And let's say that we wanted to get a third home, they're going to look at the fact, hey, you have two homes over here, or you're going to be stretched paying for another one. So they're going to look at all of the things that you have based on your income, based on your credit file, and they're going to say, maybe you can, maybe you can't. How long you've been in a job. So if you've been in a job for 6 months, that's going to be a deciding factor versus if you've been in a job for 3, 4, or 5 years, right? When I got my first house, I was in that first home I was in my job at that time for, gosh, I don't know, 4 years or so, 5 years. So it wasn't an issue of stability for them. They knew that it was good, so it wasn't a problem, right? The big thing is money saved. This is the question that people have. How much money should I save or have on hand if I'm going to purchase a home? Now, real estate offices or realtors will tell you that you need something like 10% or something like that. Let me dismiss this one too before it becomes a problem. They're going to tell you that you're going to need 10%. And that's a lot of money. I mean, I mean, they're telling you, really, you need to have about 10%. If you're looking for a home that's going to be in the neighborhood of, what did you say, 20,000? Or I'm sorry, 200,000? You're looking at $20,000 that you're going to have to put down based on what they're telling you. Now, some will say you need 3.5%, but technically, if your credit is good enough, 3% you could do, right? So 3%, because I'm not good at math, 3% is $6,000 on $200,000. So if you have $6,000, you can tell them, look, I got $6,000 that I can put towards this. Plus, I'm a first-time home buyer, so I'm going to get that tax credit type deal. Mention all those things, and if they don't mention it to you, make sure you mention that you're a first-time home buyer. You want that home buyer tax credit. So you have your $6,000. You are able to say, this is what I'm going to do. Now, keep in mind that you also need to have earnest money. So earnest money is usually $500. So that's part of that $6,000. But you want to kind of have an idea. There's closing costs. There's a lot of different things that you have to keep in mind, right? So what I'm saying is that you should have nothing that is delinquent, because typically a loan officer is going to say you got to pay it off. Doesn't matter what it is, you got to pay it off. A lot of people are rejected because of that. So now they're going to look and say, well, should you, if you're going to go do this, this is what you need to do. Now, you asked the question of, should you save up before bothering an agent? Yes. And how much should you save up in cold hard cash? If it's $200,000, you're going to have to pay a minimum of $6,000 in cash. Minimum. I don't care if it's in North Carolina or California. You're going to have to pay a minimum of 3%. And so those are facts. So that at least $6,000. There may be other weird, crazy things that come up that you also have to pay for, in addition to inspections, which you would have to pay for. There's a lot of things like home inspections you want to make sure that you get looked at, but that doesn't cover everything. Home inspections don't cover things like the plumbing, right? It doesn't cover that. When someone does an inspection, they'll go under the house if you have a crawl space. They'll look around or what have you. They'll go up in the attic if there is one. They'll look around. They'll check for termites, but they don't really check for much more than that. They'll look at some of the existing appliances like the stove and electrical outlets and make sure that they're all working and that there's the correct number of GFCIs, and they'll do all their thing. But that's kind of it. You got to pay for appraisals. You got to do. So I would say on the safe side, $7,500, if we're talking $200,000, $7,500 in cash is probably what you want to have as a minimum, just because there's all these other weird things. And if you're in an area where housing is tight, like here, the seller is not going to pay for nothing. So a lot of times, if you're buying a home, you can say, hey, that door was missing or the door was damaged, so replace the door. And typically in a lot of areas, sellers will say, okay, I'll fix that, or I'll take some off for that. But if you're in an area where the demand is so high, they don't have to. And a lot of times they're going to tell you, well, move on, because I'm not replacing anything. I'm not fixing anything. I'm not doing nothing. What you see is what you get. You're buying as is. So it depends. I don't know enough about Raleigh and the Cary area of North Carolina to say how the housing market is. But if it's like that, that is something you have to kind of consider. So you have these unexpected costs here, which are going to be potentially, which could be the sewer line could be an issue. Here in Tacoma, you have a lot of old lines and old sewer lines that ran to homes. And so sometimes a lot of people get a sewer scope done, because if there's a disconnection there, guess what? The sewage is flowing out, and that could be a problem. The city's going to say you got to fix that because it's on your property. The only time that the city will pay for it typically is if it's in the street. So here's the street, sewer line, the main line runs down the middle of the street. Homes on both sides connect to it. The line that connects all the way to your house, all the way up to this main line, is your responsibility, even though it's getting into the middle of the street. The only thing the city is concerned about, and this is typically for most cities, is that main line. That's the only thing they're going to replace or fix or flush if there's a problem, because sometimes it gets backed up and they may flush it out, but as far as fixing any piece that connects to that, nope, not going to happen. So things like that you have to actually check on. Now if you're in a more of a newer city, probably not an issue. If it's a new build, probably not an issue because they've done all that stuff. It's already all new work and everything. But sometimes over time, those pipes can be broken, disconnected, moved, whatever the case may be. Trees can come, roots will move that stuff around. Someone's putting in a driveway that may have moved it around. Heavy equipment, different things can make that happen. It does happen, or it could get old and crack and break. And so, yeah, you have those things. Those are things that people typically don't talk about. Now, in between the walls is a different story. If you're getting an older home, I would say older than 30, 40 years old. Well, let me see, because I'm 42. Yeah, so if you're getting a home that's built in the 70s on back, that's going to have some more issues because wiring was kind of all over the place. When you're getting homes that were built in the 50s and 40s, you're going to have a lot of the knob and tube wiring, right? And homes older than that, knob and tube. Then in the 70s, they had better wiring, but some of the homes were kind of mixed. They mixed some of the knob and tube with it. Or some homes at that point still used the knob and tube stuff. So you don't really know what you're getting. The home I got in 2008 was a 2006. It was all brand new wiring, not a problem. So anything you're buying in the last 10 years, this is not something to worry about. But one of the things you do have to be concerned with is the electrical panel. The electrical panel to the house that has all the little switches and things, you would have to know what that is, because a lot of times this is technical, running into the home, you have a 100 system, right? But now that we have technology where you're using so much more appliances that are very power intensive, and we have a whole lot of need for a lot of stuff more so than we did in the past, some people are upgrading to a 200 panel, which gives you a lot more. Some people say it's not needed. Some people say it is needed. I would talk to an electrician, and you can just make a free call and say, what should I look for? Right? What do you think is the best? Because they're going to be able to tell you kind of what the case may be, right? I know that's complicated. I don't know enough about electricity to be able to go there, but I do know that there's a difference, right? The more stuff we get, the more appliances we get, the more that the panel boxes nowadays are going to be a 200 system, right? Hold on. Okay, sorry, had a delivery. So yeah, that's kind of what I would suggest, is that there's a few different things that people should really and truly think about, right? That is why I tell folks often, if you go and get a pre-approval letter from the bank and they tell you that you're able to get $400,000, and that's the max that you can get, never ever tell the realtor that you're able to get 400,000. Just say, I got an approval letter. I feel comfortable doing 350, right? Even though you can do 400,000, say I'm comfortable doing 350, because you never ever know what taxes are going to be like. If you are in an area that, like what we're in, where the property taxes are just ridiculous and they just bounce all the time, getting a house right at the cut is going to be miserable because there's nothing you can do. And you often have people that get into default only because they didn't factor in the cost of the property tax. Keep in mind too, utilities here are expensive. And I go back and I tell people, like, look, you don't know what the utilities are. Utilities are something that people don't think about. But when you think about trash, sewer, water, and electric, and if you need gas, those are things that pretty much bankrupt people, right? Never go for a house just because of what it looks like, unless you're a baller and you can do that. And so again, I say, even though you might can afford 400,000, you got a wonderful job, never get a house that's 400,000. That looks pretty and it's posh and I live in such and such neighborhood, because when it comes down to it, you're going to be very surprised whenever it gets to be too much house. right? The realtor's cool because they got their money. They'll sell you the $400,000 house, but make it firm that all I can afford is 350, because more than likely they're going to look for houses that are at 350 or 355. I guarantee that. They will always do that. They will look for a house right at that cut. Or sometimes they'll say, I know that your limit is 350, but I found this one that's 360 and it's really perfect. And people go on ahead and do it. But again, I would be very cautious with the money that you're able to, with the house that you're able to get. Also, keep in mind that you have to decide: am I able to pay for the closing costs? Am I able to pay for all of the stuff right at the jump? Keep in mind too, you have to turn utilities on. That's extra money. Insurance, all of those things come into play when you're trying to get a house. So I would say look at everything. That pre-approval letter will be what kind of happens last in terms of everything else, because you got to get your credit in check. You have to make sure that you've done everything you need to do, pay off any sort of debts if there's any. That pre-approval letter is important because that's going to tell you the max that you can get. I would shave a lot of that off. And here's the thing, and this is what I told Noelle. I'd rather get a house that I have to fix up, that doesn't, I'm not saying that the floor is missing or there's a whole wall missing or all the walls are gone or there's big holes in the ceiling. I'm not saying that. But I'd rather get a house that's not Beverly Hills looking versus a house that's too much house, because what will happen every single time is that your property tax will go up. I will guarantee you your property tax, even where my mama lives, which is out in the middle of the country, property tax it'll go up, because growth happens typically, and cities and counties need to figure out how to pay for that new stoplight or those extra sidewalks or what, that new hospital that has to be built or that whatever. So everything will go up eventually, and if you get something that looks pretty today, you're going to be pissed tomorrow. So anyhow, I hope I answered your question there. Good luck on buying your home. It's always an exciting thing. There's a lot of cool things that are out there for first-time home buyers, especially the first-time home buyer tax credit. That's awesome. Make sure you join our Discord. Ask any questions that you would like there. You can also ask them on our Instagram, which I've had a few people ask there as well. You can ask them on our Facebook, which I get a lot of people, or you can email us, which I get a lot of people doing that too. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, I will see you. Take care.